My name is Jan Adrian. I've never gone 5 years without an active cancer. So for 26 years I've had cancer. I have metastatic cancer now, and I would like it to go away. Sometimes I will have a particular treatment and then I have a clear PET scan, so I can, and that's no evidence of disease. In the cancer world we call it dancing with NED. NED is N-E-D, no evidence of disease. So I've had a few years maybe of dancing with NED and thinking maybe I don't have cancer anymore, and always wishing that it would never come back, but it always has. When I first read Kelly Turner's thesis, it was before her book was published. Kelly Turner did her thesis on radical remission.
Radical remission is when someone heals from cancer without any Western medicine or after Western medicine has failed.
Radical remission is her term. She started studying spontaneous remissions, and she traveled the world interviewing people who'd had spontaneous remissions from cancer. And she decided that there's no such thing as a spontaneous remission, that all these people had worked very hard to make that happen. And she identified 9 factors that they all had in common, that they all did. And so those became my treatment. I have them printed out next to my computer so I can be reminded every day. My vision or my dream for myself always has been the St. Francis prayer of Lord, make me an instrument and use me. And I always have felt and believed that I was here for a purpose, and I may not necessarily know what it could be, and it could change, but I always wanted to be an instrument for peace, for love, for whatever God wanted to use me for. Reedley is a very small town. It's about 25 miles from Fresno, so in the central California Valley. In the little town of Reedley, there were 9 Mennonite churches. I mean, there were a lot of Mennonites. And the church that I grew up with was the Mennonite Brethren. There are a lot of different branches of Mennonites. And there were about 1,000 members in our church. So that was my whole community. And I was an only child. And my mother was one of 7 children, and her parents and all those siblings mostly lived in Reedley. So that was a part of my community. I grew up in an environment where women supported men. The wife submits to the husband, and the husband is the head of the household. And women were not preachers. But spirituality was always very important to me, and my religion was very important to me. And as I was growing up, I always assumed I would be a minister's wife. I was going to marry a preacher because I knew that the preachers needed support of their family. They needed somebody strong behind them, and I could do that. So I always assumed I was going to be marrying a preacher. There was a plaque in the kitchen of my home as I grew up that was a Bible verse that was Romans 8:28. That says, all things work together for good to those that love God. So that's always been central, that no matter what happened in my life, I would see it as for good and look for the silver lining, or look for what was good about it. My name, Janice, means the gift of God. And I was always told that I was a gift from God, because my mother had had rheumatic fever as a child, and she had a serious heart condition. And I was always told that my mother could die and probably would die at any minute. I was told if I upset my mother, I could kill her. So I couldn't have temper tantrums. I couldn't express a lot of things, which has been a problem. I've had to learn to express negative things. My mother was in the hospital, and I was told that she might die. And my mother's older sister was taking care of me, and she was living it was during the summer, and she was a house mother in a dorm, although there were no students there in the summer. So it was just she and I in this big house in the summer. And because I was really upset, I colored scribbled in my coloring book and scribbled outside the lines. And she locked me in a closet for hours, in a dark closet for hours, to punish me for coloring outside the lines. So I had a really strong lesson to not express that. So I'm still learning how to do that. Yeah. I put myself through college by packing peaches in the summertime. I started college in Kansas because there are two Mennonite colleges in the United States, and one of them is in Hillsborough, Kansas, and one of them is in Fresno, California. And I didn't want to stay that close to home. I left the middle of my sophomore year and went to Fresno State College. So I graduated from Fresno State with a bachelor's, and then I went to UCLA for my master's. I had been working as a social worker for, I started out at a state hospital, Agnew State Hospital, and then started working for Santa Clara County Mental Health in a day treatment center. So it was mostly doing psychiatric social work. And I had gotten discouraged with the path in the county mental health system and in the state mental health system, with what seemed like a revolving door, with the same people coming back often and not a lot of change happening. And I had started a nonprofit with a friend called the Center for Health Awareness. And we had a holistic health center. We had a building with doctors and other practitioners that were working there. But the main thing that my partner and I did is we were teaching classes on mind-body health for nurses. At the time it was nurses were newly required to have continuing education, and we designed a class that was 30 hours, which is what they needed every 2 years, that they could get all 30 hours in one weekend. It was a class called The Turning Point, which was about how our minds affect our bodies, and some goal setting and affirmations and visualizations. I think we were a little before our time. We were doing that from 1978 to 1985. And then in 1985, my whole life changed, and when I look back on it now, it may seem like I got off my path then. But there were changes in the whole continuing education world, and my partner and I had some disagreements, and so we split up. And it was at the same time that I met Michael and fell in love, and he was turned out to be my second husband. And we wanted to work together. I was just wanting to get out of that world. I wanted to do something different. And he had been a mission specialist for NASA, had been traveling a lot. He wanted to quit doing that. I had been traveling a lot, teaching seminars around the country. So we wanted to do something totally different that neither one of us knew anything about, so we could start something new together. And we opened a furniture store, which kept us put for a while, so we weren't traveling. And it was 2 years after we opened the furniture store that I was diagnosed with cancer. And looking back on it, it seems so obvious that I needed a wake-up call. Because during those 2 years, when you start a new retail business, it becomes one's life. So that business had become my life. And I had quit nurturing myself in ways that I knew. I mean, I was working 60 to 80 hours. I was working 7 days a week. I wasn't taking time off. It was just working. So not taking time to do things to nurture my soul. I wasn't even going to movies. I wasn't reading the things that had nurtured me in the past. And I was eating junk food because I wasn't taking time to cook and to plan the meals. And I had such a belief in the value of nutritious food. So it feels like I just deviated from my path. I was under a lot of stress, and I wasn't giving my body or my soul the nurturing that it needed. So, I mean, I said I was deviating from my path, but my belief that everything works for good is that was part of my path. It wasn't a deviation. But then I needed the wake-up call of cancer, and I think part of the reason I got cancer was because of the 2 years of not nurturing myself in any way. But if I look at my whole path, cancer was a huge blessing. So the fact that I treated myself in such a way that I got a cancer diagnosis is part of my path. I had felt a lump in my breast, and I had a mammogram, and my physician called me, didn't even see me in person, called me on the phone and said, "It's not cancer, don't worry about it." Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have let that go. I would have demanded a biopsy because I felt a lump. But I wanted so badly to believe that it was nothing, and I wanted to continue on my workaholic path that I did. I believed her and continued on my path. And 6 months later, that lump in my breast was still there, and there was an additional lump under my arm that I felt. So I felt both of them. And I had a good friend of my husband at the time who was a plastic surgeon who had his own surgery center. So he took both lumps out to biopsy them. And then he delivered the message to me that it was breast cancer. And I took it so unseriously that I didn't even take anybody with me to that appointment with him, which is something I regret. I should have had a support person with me. But the news was shocking and devastating, and I remember just sitting in my car and crying, feeling like I couldn't drive, but there was nobody with me. Because my husband and I had started that business fairly, 2 years before that, but we were just making it financially, just starting a new business, and I didn't have any health insurance. So here I was with a cancer diagnosis and no health insurance, and in a long time belief that Western medicine wasn't the total answer. So I started reading everything I could and just trying to figure out what are the options here of what I can do. In the beginning, I had cancer in the left breast. I had a mastectomy, and I did radiation. And then I continued for, I don't know how many years, maybe 10 years, at least every year, I would have a new lump under my arm. And they would surgically take it out, and it would be cancer. So I kept having, but they were local recurrences, and I always felt grateful that it hadn't metastasized. It hadn't gone to any other organ of my body, so it continued to be local recurrences. Knowing what I know now, I would not have had all those lumps removed then, because what I've learned now is that when cancer is in a lymph node, the lymph node is holding it. And taking that lymph node out is like taking the oil filter out of your car, because then it can spread. And I have a lump under my right arm now that I've had for probably 5 years. And I'm not having it taken out because it's holding it. It's right there. I can feel it, I know where it is, and it's not going anywhere. Even before I decided to have a mastectomy, I was exploring mind-body connections and spiritual solutions, and there was a spiritual teacher named Brugh Joy that was very popular at the time. He had written a book called Joy's Way, and he was an MD, but he was now focusing on spiritual aspects of everything. And I went to a workshop that he did in San Francisco. And this was maybe 2 months after the diagnosis, and I still hadn't done anything. And I went to this workshop, and he asked for volunteers from the audience to come up on stage and work with him. And there were so many people that raised their hands that they had us all put our name in a hat. So there were hundreds. There were probably 900 people there, because I know the size of that auditorium. And of course he picked me. So I got to be on stage and work with him and talk about cancer and how I felt about it. And he did a healing circle on stage. People came up and did a healing circle. But then at the end of all of that, he told me privately, he didn't say this on stage in front of everybody, but he said privately, what you're dealing with here is really big, and I would recommend you have a mastectomy. So it was his recommendation coming from, if just an oncologist would have recommended that, I might have questioned it and said, but what about the spiritual side of things? But because it was a spiritual teacher who recommended it, I decided to have a mastectomy. 2002, I think, is when I had a new cancer in my right breast, and there was also a lump under my right arm then, in addition to having a new recurrence on the left side. So that was a strong message for me that I needed to do something differently. That was the instigation for me to leave that husband. That was not a healthy relationship, to move from the Bay Area to Sacramento, and I changed my diet at that time. And that's when I had 4 years cancer, 4 years with no evidence of new cancer. And then I was diagnosed in 2007 with ocular melanoma, so cancer in my eye. That one, there was a treatment. There's two ways to treat cancer in the eye. One is to remove the eye, the other is proton beam radiation, which is a very specific treatment that at that time was only done 3 places in the country, and one of them was at UC Davis, which was 20 minutes from my house. And that treatment, they said, had a 97% cure rate, which, of course, why wouldn't I do that? Way back, going back to the beginning when chemotherapy was recommended and I did the research on that, it would have increased my chances of survival by 5%. I had 1 round of chemotherapy, and I had asked them, how much will it cost me to do this whole round of chemotherapy, and they estimated about $10,000, which of course I didn't have, but it wasn't the money that was the biggest challenge for me with chemotherapy. I did 1 round of chemo and could feel how it was hurting. It was doing damage to my body. I mean, my hair, I lost at least half of my hair. My hair came out, and I had the mouth sores and the fatigue and all those things. And when I was 16, I had an experience that has informed so many decisions since that in my life. And when I was 16, I was out of school for a whole semester, being homeschooled, because I was tired all the time. I was running a fever. I had all the symptoms of mono, but I did not have mono. And the doctors, medical doctors, could not find what was wrong with me. They couldn't label the disease, so they didn't know how to treat it. So for a whole semester, I was sick. And my parents, in desperation, took me, we were living in Fresno then, they took me back to Reedley, to this old guy who was a chiropractor that had been a missionary in South America. And he said that it didn't matter what we ever labeled what was going on, that we didn't have to diagnose it, but that our bodies, our immune system is meant to deal with whatever is going wrong, and that what we had to do was strengthen my immune system, my own body. And he rubbed minerals into my body. He had me drink this awful Chinese herbal tea. But the most important thing he did, I think, was he put me on a very restricted diet. And he used a pendulum. He had a little machine that had a pendulum that would, and he would ask about different foods and it would go different directions. And he told me not to eat anything white. No white sugar, no white flour, no potatoes, just nothing white. But the biggest thing was no sugar. And he didn't say at the time, and I didn't know at the time, that cancer feeds on sugar. he was just trying to strengthen my body, and apparently sugar weakens one's immune system. It's just not, there's no nutrition in it. So anyhow, at age 16, I was desperate and I followed his diet. So when I went to birthday parties, I didn't get to eat birthday cake like everybody else. I really did not eat sugar or white flour. Totally changed my diet. And in about 6 months, I was healthier than I think I had ever been. I only asked the question, why me, in a way of, what is this here to teach me? What's the lesson in this? Not that I deserved it. I mean, I never thought I had done something wrong to deserve this, but that it was a lesson. I always think spirit trumps matter. And I couldn't have said those words at the time, but it was shortly after my diagnosis that I heard somebody say in a conference that we are spiritual beings on a human path, rather than human beings who may or may not be on a spiritual path. That spiritual beings is first, and that lessons in life are always at a spiritual level, really. So that's one of the strongest lessons looking back on it, is if I only look at myself as a body only and I don't think of myself as a spiritual being, cancer is just a curse. I mean, there's nothing if we're only a physical body, there's nothing good about cancer, and you just want to get rid of it. Try to cure it, to get rid of the physical disease. But when you realize that you're a whole person, mind, body, and spirit, and that there are lessons here on a spiritual level, and that the spirit may be much longer living than the body. So the body is an instrument to learn things at a spiritual level. So with that viewpoint, I can always look at what are the lessons, or what's the gift. That if there has to be a gift in everything, even in cancer, what's the gift? And that wasn't obvious at the moment that I had it. I mean, I was so entrenched in that furniture store and running that business and that marriage that turned out to not be a healthy relationship, that the gift was it got me out of that. It got me back on a more meaningful path. I hear stories, or I read people's stories where they talk about the importance of loving one's cancer. It's part of your body. There are some people who won't even use the phrase "my cancer" because they want it to stay distant. They don't want to own it. It's not mine, it's the cancer. That doesn't ring true for me. I think I have to accept it as mine to take the lessons from it, so it's my cancer. But if I love it for the purpose of making it go away, because loving it might make it go away, that's not love. It's not really loving it. So I haven't resolved that. I am grateful for the lessons that I've had, but I would like it to go away now. And then I always, with any prayer, I have to say this or something better. So my personal preference is that it goes away. And if I can still be used as an instrument more by having it than by not having it, I'm willing to have it. And I'm going to die of something. I'm 74 years old. I figure I could have 10 or 20 more years. But after living with cancer for 26 years, and it'd be nice to have 10 years without it, but I'm going to die of something, so cancer is as good as anything else. When I was diagnosed, I was looking for spiritual solutions or spiritual ways of looking at it, and I was having trouble finding anything. This was in 1989. So it was before there were support groups on every corner. I mean, I couldn't find a support group, and I was looking for something that would help me view my own cancer in a broader context. And I went to a conference for health professionals, and I was maintaining my license as a clinical social worker. So I went to this conference, and one of the speakers there was Jean Shinoda Bolen, who's a prolific author, Jungian analyst, and she was talking about illness. She used mythology as a metaphor for illness, and was talking about illness as a descent into the underworld. And it was such a powerful talk. I was sitting there crying the whole time she talked, thinking, this is exactly what I've been looking for. She's just talking to me. And at the end of her talk, there were probably 1,000 doctors, nurses, social workers in the audience. And when she finished her talk, it was an immediate standing ovation of everybody. And that was kind of a surprise to me, that everybody was resonating with that message. And I thought, but these are all health professionals. What about those of us on the front line living with cancer? Those are the people that need to be hearing this message. So that weekend was the turning point for me. I made a decision that weekend. I'm going to create something that will put talks like this on the platform for people with cancer. Prior to that, when I had been the director of the Center for Health Awareness, we had been teaching a seminar called The Turning Point. And I liked that name. So then when I was thinking about doing this conference, I thought, oh, cancer as a turning point, that should be the title of it. And as I was thinking and planning that, I was on vacation in Hawaii, walking along the beach, and I saw somebody reading a book named Cancer as a Turning Point. And I thought, oh, crap. Who wrote that? How did that name get out there? That's my name. So I went and looked at the book, and it was by Lawrence Lashan. And he's a psychologist in New York who had been doing years of research on seeing if therapy could make a difference in people diagnosed with cancer. When he first started doing therapy with cancer patients, he was doing traditional psychotherapy, and that even though they felt better, they all were dying. People only let him in this research work with terminal patients, because they said if you're doing something strong enough that it could make a difference, it could also hurt them. So we won't let you work with somebody unless the medical profession has given up and we know they're going to die anyway. So in the beginning, all of his patients were dying. And then he started working with them in a different way. Rather than traditional psychotherapy, he started asking what made them excited to get up in the morning, and what were their dreams, and what was their bliss, and maybe something they had dreamed about when they were a kid that they had forgotten about, but what would help their spirit be more alive. And when he started working in that way, about 50% of his patients went into long-term remission. I mean, these were people who were dying, and this therapy made a difference. And then he asks questions in the book about what our purpose is, what makes us excited to get up in the morning. So anyhow, I loved his book, but I knew that I would have to get his permission to use that title now. So I wanted to meet him. He lived in New York. I saw that he was going to be a speaker at a conference in Santa Clara, which was not far from me, but I couldn't get there on the day he was speaking. So I went on the next day, and I thought, I'll just see if I can find him. And I was sitting in the restaurant lobby waiting to be seated for dinner when a couple came and sat next to me. And I had seen his picture, and I looked at him and I said, "Are you Lawrence Lashan?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I says, "Oh, good, I'm here to meet you." And I told him my story and asked for his permission, and he said, "You not only have my permission, you have my blessing." Bless the present, trust yourself, and expect the best. Any suffering is caused by wanting things to be different than what they are. So whatever is now, this is what washed up on my beach. This is for me to deal with. It's a gift for me somehow. Bless it. Bless the present. And then trusting yourself has become huge, especially with Kelly Turner's work on radical remission, that one of the things people did was learn to trust themselves. And there's always many opinions about what one should do, but just to learn to trust yourself and trust your own judgment and your own intuition. And then to expect the best. Often felt like one of the gifts from cancer is forcing me to learn to trust my own intuition. And that's a huge challenge for many people, I think, because we Sometimes we can't differentiate between intuition and wishful thinking or fear or things that come up. We don't know, is that intuition or is that just the committee in my head giving me suggestions that aren't good? Cancer survivors that have a cancer, have a treatment, it goes away, and they're petrified of a recurrence because they think a recurrence is going to be a death sentence. So the fact that I've dealt with cancer many times over the years, many people have told me, has really helped them lessen their fear of recurrence. Often for somebody with a new cancer diagnosis, the first thing they want is to talk to somebody who's been there. They want to know, is it possible to survive this, and what did you do? The name of the organization, Healing Journeys, is the legacy. For somebody to change their own perspective from just fighting something that's attacking them, to know that everything in life is part of their own healing journey. The Healing Journeys mission is to support healing, activate hope, and promote thriving. And that's a mission for the organization that's also a mission for myself. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1989, I came from a background of teaching mind-body health to nurses. I had been the director of the Center for Health Awareness. So when I asked so I knew there was more to healing than chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And so I asked my oncologist, and remember this was in '89, I asked my oncologist, how are we going to treat the rest of me? Because everything you're telling me is treatment of the body, and I'm much more than that. And he raised his voice, he yelled at me. He said, emotions have nothing to do with this. And I knew from my background that that wasn't true. But I thought, what about women who may not know that? If he's telling that to other people, what if some people don't know that? Healing Journeys is really a grassroots organization because I started it, and the board members in the beginning were all friends of mine, most of whom had some association with cancer. When I was diagnosed with cancer, every suggestion to me was just of the body, and I started feeling like I was taking my body to a car mechanic. One of the speakers at a conference used a metaphor that was really meaningful, that I still like. She said, it's as if she lived in the first level of a house and she thought that's all there was. And when she got a cancer diagnosis, it catapulted her to the second floor, and she didn't even know there was a second floor. But the view is very different from up there. And that once you have that view, you can never go back to thinking this first level is all there is, because you've seen something much different. And so then you always know that's there. There have been so many incidents that happened along the way, but I remember one little incident that was so meaningful for me. When I was in San Francisco volunteering at a conference, not at all related to Healing Journeys, I was just didn't have money to go, so I went as a volunteer, and I was standing at a door monitoring people that came in, and a woman came in and she looked at me and says, "Are you the lady that did that cancer conference?" And I said, "Yes," and she just started crying and hugging me, and just hugged me and cried for a long time, and she said, "I want you to know that saved my life. You saved my life." She said, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I thought it was a death sentence, and I was home dying. And a friend drugged me kicking and screaming to the conference, and it totally changed my viewpoint. So I saw that it could be a life sentence, and I am thriving now, and it changed my life. So for many people, they need something that moves them. We ask people, what was the most valuable thing you gained from the conference? And I remember a woman writing that a conversation she overheard in a bathroom line was the most valuable thing she got, because she had just gotten a new diagnosis, and she had had 12 lymph nodes positive for cancer when they took the extra lymph nodes out, which she thought meant a death sentence. And she overheard somebody in the bathroom line saying, I had 23 lymph nodes with cancer in it when I was diagnosed, and that was 10 years ago, and I'm thriving. And she thought, if it can happen for that person, it can happen for me. So the work that Kelly Turner is doing with presenting stories of survival and letting people have role models of how it can be different is really, really important. So people have that opening. I learned that life can be short, and that having more joy in one's life and having more fun in life is important. 3.5 years ago, Carrie and I fell in love, so she's my partner. I am a big Giants fan. I don't go to a lot of games, but I love being in AT&T Park. I also like to hike. I like to be out in nature. My favorite exercise is walking or dancing. I like to dance. I love music, live concerts. Those are things that bring me joy. Definitely I'm an optimist, yeah. When something happens that people would see as negative, I often have an oh shit reaction. I mean, I'm not always optimistic about everything. Sometimes when people see my optimism, they think, oh, I could never do that, because they get really upset with something. And I think that's normal. I want to say I think that's normal to not, as soon as something happens, you don't say, oh, what's the gift in this? The oh shit reaction almost always comes first. And learning techniques to get out of that, or beliefs or things that you can read, or just finding ways of expressing it too. I think journaling has been really useful for me. For some people, affirmations don't work because they just can't believe them. But I think writing affirmations out and then writing your reactions and really learning about your own reactions to it can be useful. And in using affirmations, to not jump to something that's not believable, but to do it in process. If one is feeling that life is just really a struggle and life is hard, and then you have an affirmation that says life is easy, you think that's a bunch of crap, I can't believe that. But if you can have something in process and say, my life is easier today than it was yesterday, or my life is getting easier, or I'm finding ways to not struggle as much, or something that's in process so you can feel it happening and not just be resistant to it. What makes me go forward is curiosity. I'm a very curious person. I always wonder, I mean, when things are awful and life is full of pain and it's difficult, I know it's not going to last forever, and I wonder what's going to happen next? What's going to be on the other side? Sometimes that's a disadvantage when things are going really well and I know it's going to change. I think, I don't want it to change, I like it this way. But when things are going bad, that curiosity is pulling me forward. And because I have a lot of life experience now, so I have a lot of experiences where I was concerned about something, or I thought it was a dead end, or I thought nothing would happen, and then something opened up in different avenues. And so I think if I gave up then, I would have missed that. And so I'm always curious about what's going to be next, and I'm always following the doors that open.